When I was a young man in my 20s, I used to get on the bus and go downtown to Guitar Center, because Guitar Center had an Oberheim 4-voice. And this, of course, was the ultimate instrument. This is what I coveted, I couldn't possibly afford, but they were very kind. And as long as you behaved yourself and didn't play too loud, they would let you fool around with it and play with it. So I would go down there and spend afternoons fooling around with the Oberheim. One day, I noticed a new piece of gear sitting, and it was a programmer, which in those days was unheard of. The Oberheim 4-voice had a programmer in it, which was one of the first of its kind. But here was a standalone programmer, and it was made by this company called Sequential Circuits. And I just thought this was the greatest thing ever. I thought this could actually help with my 2600. I could put this in with the 2600 and it could help program. And so I was debating whether I would spend my hard-earned money on that. And then a number of weeks later, I noticed the first digital sequencer made by Sequential Circuits. Analog sequencers have been around for quite a while. Obviously, Moog made one, Korg made them. They'd been around. I had never invested in one, so I had yet to own a sequencer. But when I saw this, I was sorely tempted, and I succumbed, and I bought it. It's number 3, which means it's third one Dave ever made, maybe the first one that he actually put out to sell. It was part of my 2600 lineup for a long, long time. It's a fabulous little piece of gear, which I loved. It actually toured with me, believe it or not. It, of course, has no memory, so that everything has to be pre-programmed before the show. You put the notes in and trigger them when you want them. But it's designed really well, and I've had it restored, so it's actually working perfectly, as it did when I bought it many years ago. Well, this one, for the geeks watching, you'll notice is one of the first editions. It doesn't have stuff in here. I don't even know what it is, but there's more stuff in here on the later versions. This is, as I said, number 3, so it's one of the very, very first versions. It, when did I first use it? I think I did it on a dance film that I scored way back. I don't even remember the name of it. And then, of course, it was on tour with Group 87 for quite a number of years. One of the strange things I did with it was on vapor drawings. I used it a lot with the 2600. So I took an envelope follower output and drove the trigger in from this. The envelope follower was driven by an acoustic piano track, very simple melody. And I programmed the notes of that melody into here so that as the piano played the notes from the tape back, it would trigger the sequence in the sequencer. Worked flawlessly. So through my purchasing this, I got familiar with Sequential Circuits and kept my ear to the ground as to what Dave might come up with next. And I'll never forget, one night I went to see Weather Report at the Berkeley Community Theater, and I had nosebleed seats way up in the back. But I looked at Zawinul's Rhodes, and I saw, to the left of him, there was the Oberheim 4-voice, and then there was the 2600, and he had the 2600 keyboard now was slightly up and over and on his Rhodes was a new keyboard, and it had lights on it, which was pretty rare in those days. I later discovered this was the Prophet 5. The Prophet 5. Well, it took some doing for me to get one. They were expensive, and I was still pretty much a starving jazz musician. But actually a good friend of mine helped out and loaned me some money, and we put it together, and I bought one. And it became probably for the next, well, dare I say, the most influential synthesizer in my arsenal. Just opened up all sorts of new things. It was polyphonic, it had memory. It was the first really modern synthesizer that I experienced. And it was just a glorious thing. I used it in the later incarnations of Group 87. It was a big part of vapor drawings. It was a big part of everything that I've done ever since. The most interesting thing was it is Never Cry Wolf. I got the job of scoring my very first feature film for Disney, Never Cry Wolf, while I was on tour. And all I had with me was a Prophet 5 and a trumpet. And I was hired. And I was put up in an apartment by the film company and said, write us a score. So I did. I went in and to a 16-track Well, started off as an 8-track, when the 16 went back to 8, back and forth, tape recorder and a Prophet 5. And that's 99% of that score is this instrument right here. One of the addendums to it, the polysequencer, is a tremendous asset for me, and it was a big part of making Never Cry Wolf work, because I could put ideas in and I could fly different parts of a sequence into picture and just try things, capturing the whole performance, as it were, on tape, and then go back and amend it and edit it and tighten it up and try to add some parts that would fill in the gaps. But this is a tremendous little tool, this polysequencer. I actually had it modified. The guys, and those are the days where you could walk into the factory and Dave would say, "Hi, how's it going?" And one of the software engineers was a fan, and he said, and I said, "Look, it would be great if you pushed one of the banks and it finished playing before you went to the next bank, because that way you could set up, to go, and then you could go in a live performance." And he did that. So this has custom-built software in it that lets each bank finish before it moves on to the next. Prophet 5 is still a big part of my sound. I have iterations of it, software version in my computer, in Logic. It's a great place for me to start. I flesh out ideas with it. It's become my piano. I used it most recently in Bill and Ted. A lot of those swirling sequences right out of that thing. You push, swirl, 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 swirl some more. It's so much fun and so good. I think most recently in TV, the Prophet 5 was a big part of Cloak and Dagger. That was an all-electronic score, and it needed big washes and big pads and just big punchy bass lines, which Prophet does it all really, really well. For so long, the Prophet was such a big part of even film scoring that I bought a second one and had it rack mounted. There's a Studio Electronics would do that. They would take if you bought a Prophet and took it to them, they would build it into a rack. And so I have one here. That was because we were doing so much with it that I needed one in 2 different rooms. Both had to have the real Prophet. But I must say, times change, and the virtual ones are close enough that for most scoring purposes I use them. But as you can see, it's very present here on the back wall, and it's a big part of any project I do where I come back here and use the real thing. A lot of the time as instrument makers, fortunes and the market shifts, they will sell the name of the instrument, they will sell to a bigger company. And a lot of Tom Oberheim, Moog, everybody has fallen into some of these troughs, business predicaments. And Dave, at one point, had sold the name Sequential Circuits and was making Dave Smith instruments. But he got it back. He bought the name back, and he is now back as Dave Smith's Sequential Circuits, which it was just so gratifying to me because he's built such a legacy of beautifully musical instruments. To the point where I saw that he had released the Prophet X. Prophet X, I'm still looking forward to learning. I've just barely broken the surface of it. I got it really as a performance instrument because it has so much depth to what it can offer. It can offer this whole world of samples, and yet it's basically a Prophet synthesizer in there as well. So I think for live performance and just exploring combinations of sounds, blending samples and synthesis together in the filter and modulation world that Dave has invented, and it's going to be it's going to be a lot of fun, and I think there's going to be some stunning things that come out of it. Favorite memory with a Dave Smith instrument? Well, one of them is with that sequencer, number 3, when I actually got that piano triggering the sequence to work, and it worked flawlessly and perfectly. But there was many a night I remember sitting in an apartment with the Prophet 5, and it was so inspiring to write on that instrument. And I still feel it is one of the most purely musical synthesizers ever invented. I'm not sure I have any regrets about Dave Smith instruments. They're just also lovely. Well, I wish I'd had the wherewithal and the finances to have bought a Prophet 10. I just think, yes, they weighed 4 million pounds and probably totally impractical. But the idea of having a sequencer, 2 keyboards, and 10 voices, it's just like, it's just dreamy. I think one of the craziest stories that happened when I actually had several instruments that have microprocessors in them in the early days, before computers, but I played Washington, D.C., close to the White House, and nothing worked. The Prophet, the lights were going, and the microcomposer wouldn't run, and I rebooted everything like 3 times. I finally said, I can't play the concert. And one of the guys backstage, stagehands, came up to me later. He said, yeah, we've had a couple of guys come here with some of this electronic stuff. It doesn't work around here. There's too much jamming. The White House, they have all these jammers so that there's nothing that runs, has any radio frequency susceptibility at all, just doesn't work. I think the biggest lesson I've learned from Dave's instruments is just how bloody musical a synthesizer really can be. You know, you start off thinking, well, they're just going to be exotic and they're going to be otherworldly and they're going to be sci-fi or they're going to be strange noises. But the Prophet 5 really showed me that they can be warm and they can be romantic and they can be all those other emotions that you don't really equate with electronic music. Somehow the Prophet opened that up to me.